Hello, MotoAmerica fans. It's time for another episode of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you may even learn something from this unlikely pair and their special guest. The mic is yours, Paul and Sean.
Hey, welcome MotoAmerica fans to another edition of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. Today we have a special guest. We had him on earlier in the year, actually before the season started, and that's Roger Hayden. We're going to have Roger on here in a few minutes, and we're going to talk about the Superbike series and some of the other classes as we've just reached the halfway point in what has been a fantastic championship so far. We're looking forward to the rest of the season and more great battles. I mean, the Superbike classes, I don't want to get started on it now because I want to wait until Sean and Roger are involved. But, you look at Laguna Seca and, we have a three-way battle for the championship. We have 4 different manufacturers in the top 4. I mean, there's so much good stuff that's going on that, it's got me excited. And, I don't get easily excited anymore, but I'm definitely excited about this season. One thing I need to do, I need to address before we get started here is Sean wrote a story talking about the penalties that were handed out, or the penalty mainly that was handed out to Jake Gagne that ended up costing him second place. He was docked 2 seconds for riding outside the track limits, which they set up in the final corner, and they did it more as a safety issue than anything else. And honestly, I didn't like the ruling then, and I still don't. I just didn't agree with. I don't agree with really much of it, but what I don't agree with is Richard Stamboli. And Richard chose to go on to his podcast, Ask a Superbike Genius. And although I agree with a lot of what Richard said, and he made some good points, but his ignorant rant on the podcast when it came to Sean Bice is just ruined his argument ruined the rest of his argument for me, because he made it a personal attack on Sean. I don't like everything Sean does. Sean doesn't like everything I do. And it's a relationship that works because we come from 2 different sides of this thing, and it all works, and it works well for MotoAmerica. And if Sean is guilty of anything, it's that he defends MotoAmerica through thick and thin. And that's what makes him a good public relations person, as far as I'm concerned. I come at it from a little different side, and sometimes I disagree with what they do, but it works for us. But for Richard to call Sean dumb, stupid, a moron, a jerk off, I mean, Sean's many things, and those 4 things don't come to mind when I think of Sean. And I just thought it was a good idea for me to defend him. He doesn't really need the defense, but I'm going to close with something, and I think it works well with this. But I think people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And that's all I'm going to say about it. So let's move on. And first of all, Roger, welcome back to the show. And thank you for all you do for MotoAmerica. Your broadcasting skills have evolved into, you're sort of a mini star now. So we appreciate having you and all you bring to the series.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. And it's been man, I don't think we could expect the season to be this exciting, at the halfway. And this is the part of the year when things really get more exciting. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be good. I mean, it's been good. And I just, the anticipation is high for it to just continue to get better and better and better. And like I said, we're halfway through. Let's talk about the Superbikes first, because obviously it's our premier class. But right now, Jake Gagne is 34 points ahead of Cameron Beaubier. It's 217 to 183. Both of them have won 5 races. The difference really in the points championship so far is the fact that Beaubier has 2 DNFs, a mechanical at MotoAmerica and a crash at the Ridge. And Gagne only has 1 DNF, which was his engine failure at MotoAmerica. So other than that, Jake has 10 podiums, Cameron has 7. And then we go to Josh Herrin, who has 1 win. He's 3rd in the championship and 39 points behind. So those 3 have sort of established themselves as the guys to beat, obviously, because of the fact that they're the only 3 that have won races. And, like if you look at somebody like Herrin, he's scored points in every single round. And that to me is probably the biggest surprise so far. You just don't expect, I expect a lot of stuff from Josh Herrin, but consistency like that isn't one of them. And I know you've been working with him a lot, Roger. Is that something you were pushing?
Well, I think, honestly, a little bit, but I think the biggest thing that Josh has done this year is, you get to a point in your career where, and I think everybody's did that before, and how can I make that next step, right? And kind of looked at himself and, acknowledge the areas where he could improve. And a lot of those he started working on, and they didn't come every day. The biggest thing for him, I think personally, and it didn't have nothing really to do with me, was his off season, right? Got in great shape, training, super confident, ready to go into the year, just ready to fight. And for him doing that, and that's just something you got to find within yourself. I mean, a trainer or anybody else can tell you what to do, but not that I was his trainer, but that was the stuff that he did on his own before he ever even called me. And I think just coming into that year, for him coming in the year just fit and ready to go. And then also too, he's Josh is really good at social media, and he really looks at that stuff. And I think he read too a lot of people saying, that maybe he didn't deserve that ride. And so I feel like he just came in the year super motivated, knew the areas where he needed to improve, and worked on them. And also, when things wasn't going right, or maybe something he was working on wasn't clicking right away, he also decided to just keep chipping at it and getting better. And that's the thing; it's the little things that add up when you get to that level, and it's the little things that Josh has been doing. Also, I think he loves his team, and I think that has a lot. And we know how good he is when he's having fun, and I think he's having a great time. And for Josh and a lot of riders, I've been there before too. I've had a factory ride, I've lost it, and I fought like heck to get it back. And when you go through those trials and tribulations of showing up to a race weekend on a bike where, hopefully a top 5 or, even, or a couple bikes he rode in Superbike that wasn't really race winning bikes, man, when you get that next opportunity again, you know what you got and you don't want to lose it. And I think that's something for sure that Josh has thought about. Well, he knows this is a great opportunity. Also, as you get older, you kind of know your chances are less. So I think just for him, all that stuff, he's, just a lot within himself, I think has been a huge jump. But, the consistency has been great. Every weekend has been really consistent, a podium guy, even when things don't go right, big crashes. And, I think he wants to sneak his way into that title fight, I believe. And if he stays consistent and we see those two guys start going at it, he could find his way a lot closer than, 30 points or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think coddle might not be the right word, but I think the team tends to coddle him and make him feel really wanted. And I know, like most of us, Josh likes to feel liked by people, right? And I mean, that goes on social media. With as much social media that he does, I know the little things that might be negative towards him. I know those kind of hurt him. He's not as tough as he acts, but I think he fits well into that team because I think they genuinely care about him and they've made him their priority and he feels that. I think the other thing that surprises me and it probably comes from just maturity, but I mean, there was a point when we can all remember when he didn't appear to be comfortable leading. I think that's changed. He was prone to making silly mistakes and perhaps being a little too anxious or lack patience. And I think that's changed as well. And then obviously he has the flat out speed that he's always had, but he's just kind of put that into a package now that you could see him contending for this championship the entire way.
And that's just, you name those things, and that's like some of the things where he knew that he had to work on. It's hard whenever you've won Superbike titles, Super Sport titles, Stock 1000 titles, and kind of being the age where Josh is at, like, well, I don't need to get any, but what do I have more to learn, or what do I have more to get better? And I think that's been huge for him, mainly getting in shape, but also recognizing those areas where he could get better and working on getting better, and all those little things. So I think that was I think that's huge for a guy to realize. And you're right, some of those areas was where he was kind of weak, and I think Josh knew that, and I think he was wanting to get better, and he's working at it. And I think he'll continue to get better as the confidence comes and he sees these things all starting to come together.
Yeah, Raj and Paul, I completely agree with you guys. I mean, we know Josh Herrin so well. I mean, he's obviously started young in our series, and we've known him, but in some ways we don't know him. And you guys have pointed out some of that stuff. The fact that some of the things he's done in the past. I mean, he seems like a different rider now. And one thing I pointed out in my duly noted this past week here is he's king of the beast now. The dude has got a broken foot and a problem with his shoulder, and he is continuing to race, continuing to ride. And I'm not saying that you should always do that. And we all know riders, that are tough. Road racers are absolutely tough. I mean, Raj, you left part of your finger on the track at one place, and, you guys ride wounded all the time. But, I know there's been some times, I mean, Josh, when a track is a little wet, he would not be sure about that in the past. I have no doubt if we have a rain race the rest of the season, he's going to go out on that Ducati without any problem. And he just is after it and wanting to do it. And, the thing about, he used to, in qualifying, he would follow guys around or whatever. He doesn't do that anymore. I mean, he's really, really changed, and it surprised me a little bit. I wasn't sure where he'd end up this year, but I have to say, I mean, where he's at is a little better than I might have thought. And I think Richie Escalante is the same way. I mean, he had a decent freshman season in Superbike, but this year he's really making some difference too. And man, what he did at Laguna Seca, getting qualifying where he did, and on the front row, and then getting 3 4th place finishes, and being in the mix and taking it to guys like Matthew Skoltz or Cam Peterson or whatever. He's done a good job. I'm a little surprised about, and I want you guys to comment on this a little bit, is Matthew Skoltz. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand it. I mean, he's got a good bike. He's very fast, and then something happens, and there's been things from, it looks like he didn't have any front brakes coming out of the pits that one time. I mean, he had that crash, what was it, coming down through the corkscrew, and then he had a bad crash that, he obviously hurt himself, banged himself up. And speaking of tough guys, he toughed it out through the weekend. But Paul, I mean, we hang on what Matthew does a lot because we like him so much. We like that team. We want him to do well, and he has done well, but something's just a little bit weird right now, don't you think?
Yeah, and I can't put my finger on it. I mean, he just, I don't know. I think I said this in the show we did earlier in the year. I never know if he's overachieving or underachieving. Is he overachieving when he does well, and is he underachieving when he doesn't? I mean, it's just difficult to figure out. I think, I don't know, the team, when things start to look like they're going well, then something happens that flips it around, and it's really hard to tell with him because he's just, it's just up and down. And Roger, I don't know if you can figure it out, or if you've thought about it enough to know what could be going on there, but it's definitely worth talking about.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is, whether it's a crash or something else, it just seems like it just doesn't go smooth from start to finish. And I think also, too, if you're struggling a little bit this year, I think it's magnified because the field is so competitive and so close, right? Where before, maybe you could be a percent off and still get on the podium. now you're a percent off for whatever reason. You're fifth or sixth because Cam's back. Cam's elevated, Gagne, and then Herrin is elevated himself to the riding the best he's ever rode. So, it just seems like now that it's hard to really pinpoint what it is. You see sometimes there's, a couple crashes or in a session. It was kind of surprising at the Ridge when he qualified really well and didn't get that good lap in. He's really consistent, but it just seems like those top three guys right now have just really, man, they've just stepped it up to a level where if you're just a little bit off or you're just a little bit not or a little bit uncomfortable, it just seems like it's a lot worse now than it was previously because there is so many good guys. I mean, you look at the top 4 or 5 guys on Sunday race 3 all finished within like 5 seconds. I mean, that's competitive and that's close.
Yeah, Roger and Paul, this year at the beginning of the season, and maybe you guys felt the same way, I personally was a little bit nervous about the Medallia Superbike class because there were so many unknowns about what was going on with that Tytler Cycle Racing team. And, with Cameron coming back, and we know the caliber of rider he is, but we didn't know about the bike, what kind of support they were going to have and how it was going to go for him to adapt to that new bike. And, PJ did really well last year too. And, Corey Alexander was getting along well and was moving up to Superbike and is always motivated. But, it was certainly good to see that Cameron did and is doing what he's doing on that bike. And it's obviously very early days for him on that. And I mean, he seems like he can certainly ride anything. I mean, we know Jake Gagne is pretty much at the top of his game and is going to continue to do, terrific. And is obviously a huge factor this year. And the guy is such a cool customer. He just, takes it as he sees it and does what he does. And Cam Peterson had a good year last year. But, it's another one. I don't want to talk about the adversity all the time with this, but I want to mention as well, Cam Peterson. I talked to his dad real briefly, and his dad is working on Disrupt Racing's team, right? He's working with, which rider is he?
I think it's the Rich motorcycle.
That's right. Bobby Fong. Yes.
I'm not sure exactly who, but yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry about that, Raj. Yeah, he's working. That's right. Sorry. He works with Bobby Fong. And he said he's so deep in that he hasn't really been able to even talk to Cam or pay attention. But he did say it's something with his mindset. And that's his dad saying it. I didn't say it. But there's something going on, and obviously he's dealing with adversity with that wrist. That bone in his wrist is terrible. And I also heard he's overcompensating or compensating and having problems now with the left-hand side because he has to kind of favor it a little bit. I mean, Paul, it's just, he's another one. We love the kid, like we love Matthew. We hate to see these guys going through this stuff, but I'm not sure what's up with Cam. And, maybe he's pressing too hard. It's a contract year for a lot of these riders. For him, I don't know, but it's heartbreaking. Don't you think, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's just got to be rough. He's had 4 DNFs and he's had 1 podium, and everybody knows how fast he is. But I don't know if this is the case, but it's like sometimes you just feel like somebody wants something so bad that they almost want it too bad, and then they struggle to, you know what I mean? I don't know if it's the pressure they put on themselves or the mistakes they make from trying too hard, but I think he's just kind of fallen into that at this point. And it's got to be rough when, we're whatever, 6 rounds into this thing, and you realize any hopes you had of being champion are already gone. And you're fighting to get back inside the top 5. And he can do that because he's still capable. He's capable of winning races and gaining a lot of points on these guys. But the big picture is that, championship's gone, and you got to feel like, okay, well, now what do I do to motivate myself for the rest of the year? I mean, the thing you should do, obviously, is like, okay, I'm going to freaking win a bunch of races, and who cares about championships at this point? And I mean, is that how you'd look at it, Roger?
I would just try to, obviously with Cam, it's just he's had some bad luck, or Cam Peterson, some bad luck for one, and some crashes as well. And some of them are like the ones at the ridge. Some of his crashes have just been really strange, like kind of crashing where you don't really see a lot of crashes. And he has showed the speed. I mean, before he crashed at the ridge, he was chasing down Jake and bringing Beaubier with him, and then just had that little weird crash. And you know how it is. We talk about it all the time with riders and confidence, and when things are going well, it just seems like everything's rolling good. Well, the same thing happens when you're having bad luck and things aren't going right. You know, he had the arm injury, couple crashes, mechanicals. It's just like they can't get the ball rolling completely in the right direction. And it seems like every time they get going, something happens. And I think for him, you know, even though he's not in the points battle, but, you know, you would think you would just want to try to reel off as many races as you can and get that ball rolling in the right direction, headed into next season, hopefully. And, you know, get that momentum going and win some races and get that confidence and prove to yourself that, because he can run for these guys. We've seen the speed, and just some small little mistakes, whether it's his part or not. And I think for him, just and contract year as well. You mentioned that. I mean, that's it's tough being a rider whenever, you know, your profession. There's 100 people. There's 5 jobs out there, and there's over 100 people wanting it. And
oh, sorry, Raj.
So I think if he can just get going in the right direction and get that ball rolling, and, you know, let's just get that momentum going back on our side.
So I'm anxious to ask both you guys this. So I'm going to ask this question to both of you, and, you know, Paul, you can chime in first. But, you know, Roger, being having teammates. So Paul, you had said, just got to, you know, concentrate on winning races now. Well, I kind of wonder now. I mean, obviously, that's what every rider needs to do. Last year, it seemed like there were a couple of races where I felt like Cameron Peterson could have won those races, but he kind of deferred to his teammate a little bit. I may be wrong about that, but it felt like at times he kind of was like, well, he's the one leading the championship. I need to be a good teammate, you know, and I don't know if this is the right way to go, because he does have his career and what's going to happen next year, but maybe this would help him to continue with Yamaha to maybe help Jake a little bit and get in the mix and, you know, enable him to do some stuff. You know, Paul, what do you think of that concept? And then I want Roger to address it as a teammate and whether he's ever had to do that.
I don't know. I think that's bullshit, really. It's
okay.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way, the best way to keep your ride is to win races. Okay. And that's how you increase your value. If you can help your teammate at some point when he really needs it, you know, more power to you. But I'm not sure they're going to get into that position, because Jake Gagne isn't really a guy that needs much help, if you know what I'm saying. So I think, you know, it's like when you play golf, right? You have a really shitty front nine and your score's high, but when you flip that scorecard over, you're like, you know what? This is a new 9 holes. Let's get my shit together and I'll forget about the front 9. And I think that's what Cameron Peterson has to do at this point, is just like, none of that happened. We're starting fresh. This is race number 1 and I'm going to go do my business. And and I think he's capable of doing that. And I think the next round is going to be very important for him to get that second half of the season started in a positive way, because I think he could actually get things rolling after that if he indeed can pull that off.
I think it's way too early in the year for him to be thinking about, you know, team orders or helping his teammate. Obviously, he's smart enough to know if he's battling with Jake, not to take any unnecessary risk. But at the same time, you know, he needs to beat Jake. He needs to prove to himself and prove to the team that he can win races. Now, if it comes down to the last race of the year and the points are close and he can beat Jake, then obviously maybe, you know, he might have to fall into team orders. But right now, I think he wants to beat Jake and prove that he can beat him, not just to the team, but to himself, and puts all that work into it. And I think Paul was right. Move on to Brainerd and act like it's a fresh start to the year and get going. And, you know, like I said, obviously with his teammate winning or leading the points, you don't want to do anything to take your teammate down. But at the same time, it'd do a lot for his confidence and his value if he could beat his teammate toward the end of the season.
All right, I want to circle back to the two guys at the top of the championship. We haven't really touched on them too much. We've dealt with the other guys a bit, but I think it's time to talk about Beaubier and Gagne. With Cam Beaubier coming back, and Roger, you're really familiar with this. I feel like he's come back from Europe, and I think he's stepped up. It reminds me of Tony Elias when he came here, that he kind of raised everybody's level a little bit. And I think Cameron coming back has done that as well. I think they all knew how good of a rider he was, because most of them have raced with him before he went to Europe. And I think they all knew that he'd come back even stronger. And so far, he's shown that that's exactly the case. He seems more aggressive to me. He seems more aggressive in the early laps. And I think it in turn has made those other guys sort of fall into the same thing. And they all realize that they can't let Jake Gagne get off the start and go. But Cameron has also shown that that's happened a couple of times, and he's been able to reel Gagne back in. But if you notice at the beginning of the race, they're all like really, really anxious to get to the front. And I think, maybe with Cam Peterson at Laguna Seca in race 1, it was a little too much too soon. Gagne said in the press conference, he's like, tomorrow everybody needs to chill a little bit in turn 2 to get these tires up to temperature and just not do anything silly in basically what's the first corner on the opening lap anyway. And, I wanted to tell him, it's like, okay, well, that's great that you think that. And I think you're totally right. But every one of these guys is a little bit nervous and apprehensive about, let's take it easy for the first 2 corners, because they have a feeling that Jake Gagne is not going to do that. So anyway, I think I think it's an interesting season. I think, we have different brands. I think Gagne and Beaubier are still a little step above everybody else. And I think it's going to play out to be really a great season. But what do you think about that, Raj? Do you think Beaubier's upped his game and he's brought those guys with him a bit?
I think Beaubier's definitely upped his game from coming to Moto2. I mean, every weekend you're just fighting for your life. And I think some people forget how good, Cam Beaubier had a lot of really good races in Moto2. I mean, he has the track record at Coda, when he got on pole there. There was a lot of races where he was at the front and the rain started and he crashed out. A lot of other races where he was toward the front and maybe toward the last couple laps, crashed. But to be able to do that just shows you where your talent level is to even be that close. And I'm with you. I think he's a lot more aggressive. A lot more. And I'm not saying that when we used to race Beaubier that he was soft, by no means. But I think he's brought that aggressiveness to Moto2. When he catches somebody now, I feel like he would maybe follow for a lap and really set up his pass as well. It seems like now when he catches somebody, he's passing them. And he's sticking it in there. You didn't really ever see Cam make a pass and be like, whoa. Now you see him, stick it in there and take those chances. And I think he's brought that over from what he's learned from Moto2 and made a huge step. I think we all thought Cam was going to win races, but I don't think we were going to, start winning them this quick. And, he was fast at Atlanta and MotoAmerica. And, we all talked about the long straightaways, the strength of the BMW. And, it's going to be different when we go to other tracks. We go to another track without a straightaway at the Ridge, and he wins.
Yep.
And so I think that's been surprising. And then also that team is relatively new. So to start winning Superbike races that quick is not easy. But I think Cam Beaubier's definitely raised his game. And, I mean, he is, I've said it many a times that, he's by far the most talented rider that I've ever raced against. He would do things on the bike or do a lap time, and you would think, how is that even possible? Or how can you string that many laps together at that pace? And I think now he's come back. We kind of talked about earlier about losing that factor ride and then getting it back or whatever. Cam knows what it's like to win, to struggle. Now he's back to knowing what it's like to win again. I don't think he wants to lose that feeling. And he's doing he's doing a great job, and I expected him to be competitive, but I don't know if I was expecting. I don't know why I'm a little bit surprised, but and I think it's also too because we see the BMW not as competitive in some of the other World Series. So you think, well, maybe it's not the bike, but then Cam jumps on it and he makes it do all those things that seems like some others have trouble getting it to do. So I think a mixture of him being really good and then also elevating the team and just being a heck of a rider and wanting to win. And, he wants to get that number one plate, and he wants to beat Jake and show he's still the king of the last how many years. And you go back to your point about, some of the guys making mistakes early on in the race because they don't want Jake Gagne to get away. I think it's 100% right because that's all we've ever talked about for the last 2 years is how Jake, the race is over on the first lap. How Jake gets out there and gets up to speed right away. And how could you not get a good start and think, I'm going to get my tires up to temperature. I'm going to get going really quick. So if he does come by me, I'm ready. I'm not going to need a couple laps to get going. I am going to be ready if he comes by. And, I think that puts pressure on a lot of guys. Like I said, we talk about it. The TV people talk about it, Live Plus, and we always just go on for the last couple of years about, and everybody can see it too. All those riders are good. They go back and watch the races. And, when you sit down after the race with your team and you debrief and, they're going to say, what happened those first 5 laps? Why couldn't you go? And you work on that, and then you get a good start, and you can see these guys really aggressive that first lap because they're trying to put themselves in that right spot because they don't want to let Jake go. Even though we say it all the time, I mean, it's really easy where we sit, right, watching it on TV or monitor and saying, you just got to get up to speed that first couple laps and not let him get away. Yeah, it's easier said than done. It's a lot harder when you're on the bike and you're in that spot.
Yeah, I think kind of what's happened as well. I think the past couple of years, Gagne's just elevated himself to the point where he's almost untouchable. And I think with Cameron coming back, he's shown that that's not necessarily the case. So I think it kind of gives everybody more hope because they've seen a guy that could catch him. They've seen a guy that can start as quickly as him. They've seen a guy who can be as aggressive as him in the early laps. And I think it's just, again, back to that raising everybody's level. I think that's just kind of what's happened. They've seen that, it's not an impossible task to beat Jake Gagne. It's a very, very difficult task. And still there's more that can't do it than have been able to do it. But at least I think everybody sees that there's, a glimmer of hope there.
And also to jump in real quick with Gagne stepping up as well. He's heard it for the last 2 years where, if Beaubier was here, if Cameron was here, he wins because Cam's not here. You know what I mean? Like he hears that all the time. I mean, he hears it, and he's stepping up this year because he wants to prove to everybody it's not because Cam left. I'm the man.
Right. And it's easy. Yeah. It's easy for him at this point to say it because he's got a big points lead still. But I honestly believe Jake when he says that he enjoys this more. He enjoys having a battle every race. He enjoys having somebody, that he can he'll tell you, he's like, I never count Cameron Beaubier out of any race. I don't care where he qualifies. I don't care where he's gridded. I just don't count him out. But I think he actually enjoys the battle. And I wouldn't say that he was getting bored with all that winning because that nobody gets bored with it. But I do think he's enjoying himself a lot more now that he's got a battle. That could go away if suddenly the championship gets a bit closer. But for now, I think that's actually the case.
Yeah, I mean, I know that when we see Jake take off like he does, we're like, oh, we've seen this movie before. But I mean, Road Atlanta, Cameron was quite a ways back. And you were going, I remember, Paul, you were like, oh, he's catching him. And, I couldn't believe that it went like it did to the point now where you can't count that guy out wherever he is. He seems to like he's able to catch up and get there. And you're right. It has empowered some of the other riders. And one of them, I'm wondering how it's empowering him. I think it is, but I know they have a good relationship, is his teammate, PJ Jacobsen. Now, PJ is known to be a little bit lower spec bike, although it turned out, whoa, I don't know if you heard that. That was in the background there. Although if you have heard what I've heard, which is that, Cam had that other frame while he damaged the fuel tank and ended up back on this kind of the same kind of bike that, same spec of BMW M1000RR that PJ was on. And I think that fuels PJ for sure. As much as he likes Cameron, I mean, he obviously wants to beat him. So that's another rider that I want to ask you guys about. And Roger, maybe you can comment on this. Cameron is the carrot for PJ Jacobsen. PJ was the incumbent on that team last year, had some great results, including, that last lap finish at the last race at Barber when he got past Petrucci when nobody expected that to even happen. Another teammate question, Roger. I mean, is that first one you want to beat your teammate? Is that helping PJ with Cameron?
Yeah, I think it's helping, and also it hurts too. Like you see your teammate do a lap time and you're on basically the same bike. I mean, even if he's got something a little bit different, there's really not a part on the bike that you both on that gives you just a half a second. So I think, for one, that's elevated PJ. And PJ, you could see it in PJ's eyes at MotoAmerica, and it was kind of cool. I mean, it was cool, but it wasn't cool to see where he was disappointed with second. And that's when a rider's got some confidence that he knows he can win, should have won, wants to win, not happy with the podium. And I think for PJ, just use that carrot, look at that data if possible, figure out what Cam's doing, and don't get discouraged. And the big thing with PJ, and we've talked about this with a couple of the other guys, is kind of eliminating some mistakes. And that's really hard to do when everybody's so close and you're pushing it on that ragged edge. And, you go to Laguna, he's top 3 in every session, then he crashes and totals his bike right before the first race, right before everybody put a new tire on to go any quicker, finds himself in the third row. And I mean, that's just hard to do, come from the third row. So I think he knows what the bike can do, but it also just trying to find that consistency each race weekend, like fast one weekend and then maybe not as fast the next. You can just carry that over to each weekend. And, it's difficult when your teammate's doing really well every weekend and you're basically on the same bike.
So there's another rider that I don't know if we wished for or hoped for, but we were certainly glad to see that he got another shot back at riding in Superbike, and it's Bobby Fong. We had him on the podcast recently, and it was before he did this, and we were kind of, excited and hopeful about what we were going to see. And I mean, it's gone okay so far, but I mean, obviously he's got to figure the bike out. He hadn't been on a Yamaha. He's got to integrate with that team a little bit, but I don't know. I mean, is there more to see from Bobby? And I think there is. It's tough to split his time with what he's doing, but now that he's on that bike, what do you think so far, Paul?
Well, man, it's, I was excited when he got the ride and the opportunity to ride the Yamaha. But, since then I've talked to David Anthony about the bike, and, he said that there's this misconception that Yamaha is very easy to ride and you can just jump on it and go fast. And David told me that he struggled with it and he had a feeling that Bobby might struggle with it as well. And I think that's probably what the case is. I mean, I think everybody in the paddock has always thought of that bike as being like the holy grail. And man, if I could just get on that bike, I'd rule the world. And I think, Bobby's shown that maybe it's not by any means that the bike's no good, because that's obviously not the case, but maybe the bike's a little difficult to adjust to. And, obviously he comes back into that class after not being in it for a while, and things change. I mean, everybody's getting faster. Everybody's got more time on their bikes. Everybody's got more time with their teams, whether they're new or existing teams. And I think the landscape has just changed a bit. And so far he's had a bit of a struggle, getting to the point where he's actually competitive, to the top 5 or whatever his immediate goals would be. But that's kind of how I see it at this point.
And I think too, for him, jumping in the Superbike class mid-season is hard. And even if you got Jake Gagne's bike from the previous year, you're going to a team that's learning the bike as well. It's not like him and his team had the off season. Jake Gagne had that bike, and attacking those guys have been working on that for 4 or 5 years. They know the insides and out and all that. So, that's a little bit of a bonus. But you jump on it, you haven't been in the Superbike for a couple of years, you never rode the Yamaha. The team is relatively new to the Yamaha as well. So it's going to be hard the Superbike class is hard. I mean, you're not going to jump in mid-season, I don't think, on a bike that you haven't rode all year and then start podium Superbike races unless, maybe Rossi. But, it's going to be hard if you've never rode on a bike. No off-season testing. Hasn't rode a Superbike in a couple years. Team just got the bike this off-season, didn't have a lot of off-season testing and all that. It's going to be hard. And he was making big strides at Laguna and then had that crash and, didn't make the last race. But that weekend, you were seeing his name at the end of that. You could see him in the picture with that next group finally. He was making some big strides and had that big crash in the second race. So I guess the big thing now is, are they going to have all the same parts to fix it back the way it was?
Hey, so I was going to mention something at the top of this podcast, but Paul left me speechless because I didn't know he was going to do that. And thank you, Paul, for coming to my defense. You and I battle each other sometimes, but it's good to know somebody's got my back. So aside from that, I want to tell you, yesterday I got a phone call from Benjamin Smith, and Raj, I'm sure you know about this, but obviously, and Paul does for sure, he things went sideways for that team. He was on CW Moto and not sure what they're going to do the rest of the year, but Benjamin is no longer going to be riding for them in Superbike. And it's no secret that he had some trouble adapting. Well, I wasn't sure what he was going to do. So he called me yesterday and said, hey, I'm going to get this thing going, and it's going to get going as soon as Brainerd. He's on the entry list, and this is kind of a little bit breaking news, but Benjamin is going to go his own way. He's going to go he's going to go into Stock 1000 and Superbike Cup, but he's right now building his own R1. It's going to be his dad and a couple other people on the team, but he's actually working. The bike is being built by Don, who's one of the guys that works at Westby Racing. Don actually works with Ryan Burke. Sorry, took me a second. Who's also on an R1, so he's been helping him this year. And so he's having essentially a Westby Racing R1 built to stock 1000 specs. So that'll be a little bit better for him to handle. And he's going to be back as soon as Brainerd. So the big question is whether he can get that bike ready and get his team all set up to go up there. So, and then of course he'll continue on through the remainder of the season. He has some relationships with Northeast Cycle Outlet Racing, who he raced with before in Superbike and Supersport. His uncle, I think it is actually one of the crew members, and Kyle Alexander, the owner, is somehow related to Benjamin too. So I know he's going to get some support from them as well. But speaking of that, with Supersport and those guys field, of course, Anthony Mazziato, and CJ LaRoche. But I want to talk a little bit, we're running out of time, but I want to talk quickly about Supersport. And I think I'm going to kick it back to Roger again, with this crazy thing with Xavi Forés, the Spanish rider who's racing for Warhorse HSBK Racing Ducati. And we knew he was good. And we also heard that he wanted to be on the Superbike, but he ended up being on the Supersport bike that, I don't know if it's the same bike, but it's certainly the one that Herrin raced to a championship last year. And Forés has been unbeatable. I mean, he said he self-admitted he had a tough time at Laguna Seca with the front end of that bike because they had quick change forks on it and it changed the handling. But the dude still won the race, whether there's pit stops or not, and the team helped him with that. But he could win every race this season. What do you think, Raj?
He definitely, I think. I mean, it's going to be really hard because Josh Hayes is not going to want to let him win every race. So he's going to throw everything at it. But the impressive thing with Xavi is he's a racer and he focuses on the race. He puts a lot of laps in practice, works a lot on race setup. A couple races this year, not qualify on the front row. Don't really see his name up there a lot, like top 1 or 2 in practice or qualifying. And when the race starts, he finds his way straight to the front right away. And the team's not making any mistakes, and he's not making any mistakes. At Laguna, a lot of problems with the front end. You could see he had almost a couple crashes, and you could just see that veteran experience pop in. He's like, well, second is the best as I'm going to do today, unless something happens. And he doesn't try to force it down the road to keep that win streak going. And then Josh and him have issues in the pits, and he's able to win. And I think, talk about confidence a lot, I think he feels like he can't put a wheel wrong. And, we've all heard the rumors, right? If he wraps it up early, is there a chance on a Superbike at the end of the year? That's just a rumor. I heard somebody, ask me if I knew anything about it, and I don't, by the way. But if he wants to be on Superbike, so the sooner he can wrap it up, maybe, if that's possible, he gets to get on the Superbike. And, and then also you never know, too, a clause. If he wins a Super Sport title, does he automatically get a Superbike ride the next year? I don't know if it's in there or not. I'm just saying. But it's been really impressive, and he's a world-class rider, and he's had a lot of great results in World Superbike. I don't know if we expect him to kind of go on this run, but he's been really impressive.
Yeah, I don't see him losing. I thought if there was a chance of him losing, I thought it might be in one of the extended races, just because, there's more things that can go wrong and there's more things that he can't control. But I mean, talk about a gentleman, a great racer. I mean, I'm so happy that he's in our series and he wants to stay here. It seems like forever, and we'd be happy to have him because he's quality dude, and he just goes about his business, and you can just tell he's a real professional with it. And I know he does anything we need him to do, and I can go ask him about anything, and he'll tell me yes, and we'll get it done. So it's from our standpoint, it's a win-win.
I will say one thing about that, though. We've seen a couple of the other guys come over from Europe, didn't really like Brainerd. So
true.
That's true.
A different rider. Everybody's different. He might come there and fall in love with it, thinks the greatest place ever. But I think that's got to be one on the calendar. And then Josh gets around. I mean, Josh gets around everywhere really good, but also New Jersey.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like you said earlier, I don't see Josh throwing in the towel on this by any means. And at this point, we all talk about that record and this and that, but I don't think that record's at the top of Josh's mind. Obviously, he'd get that record, but he'd get it by doing what he really wants to do, and that's beat Xavi and win a race. So it's going to be tough. I just everything that I've thought would go against him, he's somehow been able to turn it on its head and deal with it. So that's why I tend to think he's going to be difficult to beat, but I definitely think Josh has a chance as well. So.
Hey, Roger, you're an old Kawasaki rider. I want to ask you about this, what you've observed. Well, before I say that, let me just say the Vision Wheel M4 X-Star Suzuki team. I mean, Tyler Scott and Teague Hobbs. Teague has done a great job as a rookie in there. And, clearly Tyler Scott is just a smoldering fire all the time. I mean, the kid's got some wisdom and racecraft beyond his years. And, we have yet to see his potential, but he's a factor for sure. But I've been hearing lately, and I'm not going to get into the whole balancing thing, but I'm going to just say I've heard lately that 636 is the alpha dog in that class. And Stefano also is riding extremely well this year. Josh Hayes told me he's not a club racer anymore. He's a national caliber rider, and he's showing it for sure. I mean, he's integrated with that Tyler cycle team. But Raj, talk about your old Team Green and that bike. Have you ever ridden a 636? And do you see that thing's got maybe not an advantage, but it's a good weapon?
I actually never rode the actual 636 because they rode that in the 750 Super Sport class before I got to Kawasaki. And then when I got to Kawasaki, the rules were the 600 and I rode the ZX6. But I think just to Stefano's, I think it is a really good bike. Honestly, I mean, it looks as good as any of them out there. And I think for Stefano, talk about guys stepping up, he's found couple levels this year. And I think a lot of that, you talk about, the Tyler cycle, having a team. Before, he was his own mechanic. He was in charge of getting the bikes there, the cruise hotels. I mean, he did it all. Ran the tires on the race weekend, working on the bikes during during practice in the pits. It's really hard to work on that mental stuff whenever you're doing that, like looking at track maps or really thinking about where do I need to improve when I got to worry about, I got to pick these tires up, so I got them ready for qualifying. And I think being able to have that team and have some mechanics and really focus on his riding and riding at the front, he's really elevated his game this year.
All right, guys. I hate to bring it to a close, but we've covered a lot of stuff. We could go on all day long talking to Rog. I appreciate your insight, Rog. You're somebody who's obviously been there, done that, and you know what you're talking about. Sean, I'm glad you're still with us and you didn't throw in the towel yesterday and resign, do anything stupid like that. So, if you're a jerk off, you're our jerk off, and we'll take that, okay?
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
All right, you boys take care, and we'll see you in the land of 10,000 lakes here in a couple of weeks.
All right, see you, fellas. Thanks.
Bye.